Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler, and my guest today is Scott Ritter and Joe Lombardo. Happy birthday, Joe. And what
Thank
we're going
you.
to talk about is the origins of the conflict in the Ukraine starting in 2014. So, gentlemen, let's start with Scott.
No, let's start with Joe. He was an eyewitness. He was there on the ground. I think we should start with the eyewitness.
Okay.
Well, I wasn't there in 2014. I was in Ukraine twice. Once right after what was called the Orange Revolution, which was another attempt by the United States and the Western governments to overthrow the Ukrainian government. And there were some very interesting things I learned there. The other time was in 2019. I went as an observer because the people of Odessa were holding their annual memorial for those people that died in the House of Trade Unions protesting the 2014 coup. And each year they held a memorial to them. They were attacked by bands of Nazis, and a number of them were killed, and many more were wounded. Um, so they would hold memorials each year, and they would invite international observers because each year the Nazis would say they were coming back to do the same thing. And we did see Nazis on the ground, but nothing like that happened while I was there. It was the second time our organization, UNAC, went as observers to observe these demonstrations. The first time, the people that went were attacked by the Nazis. Their bus was hit by rocks, and they were physically attacked. But I wasn't when I was there. So I wasn't there in 2014, but I just have a general knowledge of what did happen in 2014.
Um, I think this is important because it's the weekend before the general election, and the Democrats keep saying if the Republicans win in Congress, then our democracy is over. Well, we overthrew a government in the Ukraine in 2014 that was democratically elected. Um, Tell us a little bit about how that transpired. Would you like to start, Scott?
Well, I mean, the how it transpired um, is that the United States made a determination that the government of Vladimir Putin was no longer convenient to American national security goals and objectives. That a Russia that was reinvigorated could not be controlled in the manner that Russia had been controlled by the United States throughout the 1990s, when our handpicked man in the Kremlin, Boris Yeltsin, governed over one of the a period of some of the greatest corruption ever seen. It was totally undemocratic, regardless of what people like Michael McFaul might tell you. Democratic governments don't put their tanks in front of the parliament and shell it, as Putin did in October of 1993. And democratic governments aren't bought and paid for by outside powers. I mean, not as Putin did, I'm sorry, as Yeltsin did in October 1993. And they're not bought and paid for by outside powers as the Yeltsin government was after the 1996 election, which the United States openly brags about the role we played in keeping Yeltsin in power. There's nothing democratic about the Yeltsin era. And there was nothing democratic about Putin being appointed president. He was handpicked by Yeltsin for a reason. Um, I believe in studying the condition of the Yeltsin camp, that they were to a person as corrupt as the president was, and the president Yeltsin was very concerned that if he simply appointed somebody that was corrupt like him, that the whole house of cards would come crashing down, and that would be trouble for him. That'd be trouble for his daughter, other relatives, and other friends that had enjoyed the decade of corruption. So he handpicked the one guy in his staff who was honest. That was Vladimir Putin, a man that even you speak to the consular general, the U.S. consular general in St. Petersburg at a time when Putin worked for Sobchak. You talk to national NGOs. non-governmental organizations that were seeking, funding from the St. Petersburg Council. The only person that worked for Sobchak that didn't take bribes was Putin. The only person that actually sat down and listened to what they had to say and had intelligent answers or questions to their proposals was Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin operated that way throughout his time with Yeltsin, and Yeltsin picked him because he was the one guy he could trust. That when they shook his hand and said, "I won't prosecute you. I will ensure that your family is safe," Putin lived up to his word. But Putin also turned around and said, "We're changing Russia." And the way he was changing Russia wasn't to the liking of the United States. And we had been trying for some time to dissuade him of this. George W. Bush famously invited Putin to the United States, where he looked in his eyes and he could get the measure of his soul. Apparently, George W. Bush isn't very good at looking into souls, because if he thought he saw a compliant Russian, he didn't. He saw a Russian who was determined to stand up to American overreach. When Obama came in, because this comes down to Obama, basically. The United States had a policy of expanding NATO for some time. We had that policy since we lied to Gorbachev back in 1991. But in 2008, while Bush was still president, NATO formally invited Ukraine to join, and this was a policy inherited by the Obama White House. The advisor for Obama at the time was a guy named Michael McFaul. Michael McFaul was a Stanford professor who has written extensively criticizing Putin, was head of the Russian desk at the National Security Council. And he advised Obama to embrace a policy of regime change. Now you're going to say, wait a minute, Scott, regime change, that's not anywhere in the language, at least not the language that's available to the public. You're right. They called it the reset, the Russian reset. But the reset was about empowering Dmitry Medvedev, former prime minister who became president, to stay in power and keep Putin from coming back in power. Putin had served his 2 permitted constitutional terms as president, was compelled to step down, so he swapped with Medvedev. And the idea of the reset was to keep Medvedev in, Putin down, and then turn Medvedev into Yeltsin, because that's what we do. That didn't work. Putin got reelected in 2012, and that reelection set the United States on a path to Maidan, because the heart of our strategy for weakening Russia is to strip Ukraine away from its orbit. And I'll just leave you with this. Michael McFaul. I'll just say that name one more time. Michael McFaul. He was the head of the Russia desk. He is the guy that was responsible for building this policy. But when you're at the National Security Council, you're not an innocent Stanford professor. You are literally at the heart of evil, and you are able to influence policies. He became the ambassador of the United States to Russia. Ask yourself why. If the policy of the United States is regime change, and the architect of regime change is now the ambassador to Russia, what's his number one policy objective? Regime change. The one thing McFaul will never talk about, and he can't because of law, is his relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm here to tell you right now that the station chief in Moscow, the station chief in Kiev, the station chief in Warsaw, and the station chief in London were working an operation to remove Vladimir Putin from office. And a centerpiece of this operation was the Maidan revolution that took place, or the coup that took place in February 2014. The coup wasn't just about ousting Viktor Yanukovych. The coup was about setting in motion events that would see Ukraine stripped away from Russia, leading to the fall of Vladimir Putin. That's what this is all about. That's what everything is about. We want to remove him from power.
So, people are not aware. Maybe they forgot it was 2014. But Barack Obama was president at the time. And I think people should realize that. What do you think?
I personally think Barack Obama is one of the worst presidents we've ever had when it comes to national security and adhering to the principles that we set forth as Americans. The biggest con artist in the world. But I'll let Joe Lombardo finish that answer. I apologize, Joe, for cutting you off.
It's okay. Well, yeah. I don't think it matters that much if a Democrat or a Republican is in. I think the powers that be decide policies, and these people represent those policies. And the same was true with Barack Obama. It was very smart for the powers that be in the United States to put Barack Obama in power because it kind of won over the Black community, which typically has been the most radical community in the country. One of the groups that is a leader of UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, is the Black Alliance for Peace that analyzes very well. And one of the things they showed was that in the Black community, there was always more of a peace sentiment than there was in the white community, from Vietnam through all the years until Barack Obama came in. And then for the first time, the Black community showed less of a peace consciousness because they didn't want to oppose the policies of Barack Obama. So it was very important. But basically, Barack Obama carried out the policies that Scott was talking about of pushing for regime change in Russia so they could better control Russia, better surround China, which was becoming an economic and political challenger to the United States in many, many ways. And the way they wanted to do that was to put an anti-Russian government in power in Ukraine. That was one of the ways. There was many others that they were using to try to bring about this regime change. So in 2014, the largest party in the country of Ukraine was the Party of Regions, since it's gone through other names, but after the coup, it was actually banned. And Viktor Yanukovych was the president. He had been elected president. And there was discontent in Ukraine. I saw that both times I was there. So many people, the economy was destroyed. So many, especially in 2019, were just working in the margins, were doing work. One person that I knew and met and helped show me around Kiev had a profession. He had gone through college and graduate school, but he was working in kind of a chop shop, just to break up cars and repair some and get parts from one set of cars, put them into another. His girlfriend, his fiance, had been a bodybuilder, very attractive woman, and she won the European Women's Bodybuilding Contest, but she just worked helping train other people. So many people didn't have jobs and were looking for a way out of Ukraine. And the fact about 15 million people had left Ukraine for other parts of the world, for Russia and for Europe, to try to find better jobs because things were so bad and there was so much corruption. And so there was an organic movement against the government. But the United States captured that movement, used that movement, brought some of the Nazi forces from around the country into Kiev and turned the protests in Maidan into a coup that overthrew the government and the elected government, got rid of the Party of Regions, the largest party, which was supported mostly by in large part by the Russian population in the East and the South, who felt discriminated against. Even before the coup, there was a lot of discrimination. I saw this in 2006 when I was there, how they were fighting over what language at a particular course I was at was to be spoken, and how there was almost blows between the Russian and the non-Russian people that were there. But so there was a lot of discontent, and the U.S. used this and brought the right wing in, banned the Party of Regions, banned the Communist Party, which was the second largest party in Ukraine, and put in a government that was going to be hostile to Russia. The Party of Regions was known for trying to have good relationships with both Europe and Russia. And the United States did not want a party in power that wanted good relationships with Russia, because they wanted to use the government against Russia for part of their regime change agenda. And so this is what the coup was about, and the U.S. was very, very much involved in it. John McCain came and spoke to the people at Maidan Square, said, "You're doing a great job, but you got to go all the way. You got to overthrow this government." When I was in Kiev last, it was very interesting because one major street, which was named after a hero of Ukraine who resisted the Nazis when they came in, and they named a major street in Kiev after him. They changed the name of that street to John McCain Street. And that's the name that exists right now for that street. We know all of stuff with Victoria Nuland and the hacked phone call where she actually chose who the next president would be in Ukraine, and she chose someone from the right-wing Fatherland Party, whereas the Germans wanted this other guy who was also right-wing, but not as right-wing, this guy that was a boxer that became the mayor of Kiev. But of course, it was the U.S. person that was put in there. The U.S. played a major role in that coup. And of course, the coup was not supported everywhere in Ukraine. There were huge demonstrations against it. And the military at first was unable to put them down. And in some cases, the military refused to put them down, like in Donbass, and just some of them just left the military rather than fighting their own people. But the U.S. used its influence now with this new government in Kiev to build up the military, to train the military, to send weapons to the military, and turn it into one of the largest militaries and strongest militaries in the world to help fight Russia. And that's the fight that we're seeing going on right now.
Scott?
Again, I want to come back to the CIA because they are literally, and I say as somebody who used I never was a CIA employee, although if I was, I couldn't tell you. But I worked closely with the CIA back in the 80s and 90s. And there's a lot of people in the CIA I have a lot of respect for, professionals who do a very difficult job. But the CIA also is a covert tool in the hands of the U.S. government, a U.S. government that has no qualms about violating international law and showing total disregard for the sovereign rights of sovereign people and sovereign nations. Back in World War II, way back in World War II, the Germans actually had significant allies among the Western Ukrainians. The moment the Germans invaded, some 80,000 Western Ukrainian men immediately signed up to join the German military. And over the course of the year, over 200,000 Western Ukrainians fought alongside the Germans, primarily in SS divisions, but also in territorial units, including units that were under the control of a guy named Stepan Bandera. The Germans, when the Germans started retreating from the Soviet Union in 1944, this organization, intelligence organization East, commanded by a general named Gehlen, started putting together a stay-behind capability of partisan units, pro-German, pro-Nazi partisan units, and intelligence assets who would report back and carry out sabotage against the Soviets. And these partisans they survived Nazi Germany. When Nazi Germany ended, these units were still out there doing it. The Gehlen organization, was guilty of perpetrating numerous crimes against humanity. I mean, Gehlen literally was a war criminal who should have been put up against the wall and shot, along with a lot of the people in his organization. But instead, the United States took him under their wing, and we adopted the entire organization. I'm talking about, it's like taking an SS unit, just bringing it in and rebranding it as good old pro-American guys, because we wanted to control that network in there. So the Germans, the Nazis, who are now working for the Americans, are controlling the network inside Poland and Ukraine, whose job is to kill the Soviets. And we did that for up until 1954. The CIA actively supported the Gehlen organization in carrying out this covert war against the Soviet authorities. And it's not small. I'm not talking about a handful of people. 46,000 Soviet soldiers, Red Army soldiers and NKVD security forces were killed. 46,000. Over 200,000 Russians lost, or Ukrainians and Russians, civilians lost their lives during this time. This is major fighting. This isn't minor fighting, but they lost. But the CIA wasn't done, because when they lost, many of these people were taken out and they went into a diaspora. The CIA funded them continuously. from 1954 until 1990. We funded them to carry out propaganda work inside Ukraine, promoting Ukrainian ultranationalism. Now, you could say the CIA stopped formally funding them in 1990. If you know anything about the CIA, you're never done. You never walk away from the CIA once you've taken their money. And the CIA case officers who work here in the United States, by the way, one of the biggest stations in the world is the New York station, where the CIA has an active group working, and they do things like remain in touch with their good Ukrainian friends. And the CIA station in Ottawa, Canada, works with the Canadian diaspora of these people. And why that's important, because 2014 didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't like the United States said, my God, who do we need to turn to? We had been working with these Nazis nonstop. So we knew exactly who to call. We knew exactly what buttons to push. We knew exactly to empower. We were familiar with everybody inside Ukraine. We knew all the right-wing parties. We knew everything about them, and we empowered them. We gave them the money. We told them we're behind them. We gave them the backing. And that's why 2014 worked so well, because it wasn't spontaneous. There was spontaneous demonstrations protesting Viktor Yanukovych's decision not to lean towards the EU, but lean towards Russia in 2013, but they were peaceful in nature. The transition from peaceful demonstrations to violent coup d'etat happened relatively in a short period of time, but it had been in preparation by the United States for a very long time. The CIA is responsible for all this, and they're still there today working hand in glove with these Ukrainian nationalists. I mean, that's what should disgust Americans as much as just about anything, that we are the people that empower the nationalists who have their ideological linkage to the very Nazis that our grandfathers were giving their lives to destroy back in World War II.
So in 2012, Obama ran against McCain, and Obama won. So fast forward to 2014, whether it was Obama or whether it was McCain, the same thing would have happened. Am I correct?
I believe so. I do believe that what Scott said about Obama is very true. Obama could do it better than McCain because Obama had the allegiance of people that might, in other situations, have resisted that kind of intervention. But Obama helped pacify them. You know, when I was there, I said the first time I was there was right after the Orange Revolution. I was there with a friend from Siena College who wrote a book and taught courses on something called emotional quota, which is like an IQ, but it's for emotions. It teaches people how to work with other people and have respect for themselves and so forth. And the reason I was over there was because she was invited by some Ukrainians to come over and teach these courses to teachers. So I went over with her. We landed in Lvov, in the extreme western part of the country. We eventually got a car that took us in about 100 kilometers east, and we stayed for a while in a small town teaching teachers from throughout Ukraine. And we heard many, many stories about the Orange Revolution. Like some of the Ukrainian teachers said, oh, we really loved your country. They really helped us out during the Orange Revolution. They paid for buses to get us to Kiev. They paid our employers so they wouldn't lose money when we left. So it was very clear the US played a major role in that. But the interesting thing was, as we investigated further, it was a US-sponsored NGO that brought us there. And these non-governmental organizations, there were thousands of them throughout Ukraine. And their purpose was to try to bring, more Western thought and Western ideology into the country. So in all these countries, including in Russia, and I think this is part of what you see in what some people call the anti-war movement in Russia, which is a minor movement. UNOC just had demonstrations around the country in over 80 cities. It wasn't mentioned. But if something like that happens in Russia, it's mentioned in all the US papers. But what they do is, they entice people. Look at our Hollywood films, look at the culture that we have, look at the opportunities we have. You can be like that too. And among people with that mindset, they build up an opposition. It's one of the ways they do it. And that was clearly what the role of what we were doing there, showing them the great way that the American culture and American civilization can be, in teaching these kinds of courses to you and all this kind of stuff. So I think the role of the United States through groups like the CIA and USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy and many, many others, and the Soros and others, build these kind of NGOs as a way of promoting Western ideology and Western values. And then within that milieu, they can build oppositions to try to do regime change. I think that's what they did in Ukraine. And I think that's what they try to do in Russia and all around the world.
What I find interesting is when you put on the TV and they talk about the election, and they talk about, well, you've got to vote this way because if you don't, it'll be the end of democracy, in the United States, and I think that's a pretty scary thought. Do you think, from the perspective of both of you, is that a scare tactic?
I think it is. I mean, Joe,
Yeah, I think it is
better
too.
plugged in.
Look what happened in New York State, where we all three of us live. Um, there's a third party. It's very, very difficult for third parties to exist in the United States. It's the whole political structure is corrupt and in bad shape. But there was a third party, the Green Party, that actually made their quotas for signatures. To get on the ballot, they needed to get 50,000 signatures. Democrats and Republicans don't have to get any signatures, but they had to get 50,000 signatures. They got on the ballot. And to stay on the ballot, they needed to get 50,000 votes in the elections. And they got 50,000 votes. So they were on the ballot. But the Democrats were more threatened than the Republicans by the Green Party because more progressive people might be pulled away in that direction. So what did they do? The Democratic Party which controlled the legislature in New York State, they changed the requirements.
Hmm?
Instead of 50,000 signatures and 50,000 votes, you needed to get 150,000 signatures and 150,000 votes. They just changed it so you can't have another choice between the Democrats and Republicans. And there is no choice between those two parties, especially for anti-war activists. I mean, just think of it. There was these so-called progressive Democrats that wrote this letter that said, we should perhaps negotiate about this war. And they were beaten down so fast that they had to withdraw their letter within hours. There is no democracy there. There's no anti-war wing. This war is against all of us in the United States and around the world. Think of what it's doing to our economies and the inflation and the unemployment. As billions of dollars going over, time and time again that could be used here for education and healthcare and infrastructure that goes over there. But there can't be any opposition on this war. So the political parties do not allow the democracy that would allow voices like mine, voices like Scott's, other voices to really be heard and to get in a debate. We only can speak on the margins. We can speak in great programs like yours, Cynthia, and others, but it's in the margins. We're not heard on the major TV stations and so forth that you're talking about, that's saying if we don't vote for the Democrats, we're not going to have democracy. So there's no other voices that are allowed in there. There's no real democracy here. And to get elected to national offices, you need to be a billionaire yourself or be supported by billionaires to have any serious campaign. So it's the rich have a democracy, but working people don't have a democracy in this country. And all they care about is whether it has the illusion of voting, not whether what people need and want and are saying really gets to happen.
Mm.
So that's my thoughts about democracy in the United States.
What if, what's your feeling, Scott?
Well, I mean, I'll second everything Joe said about voting, but I'll throw in one other thing that goes beyond voting. Dissent is now undemocratic. Dissent is now a threat to democracy. You hear this from the government. You hear this from congressmen. We now know that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security were actively colluding with Twitter and Facebook to deplatform dissenting voices. How is that democratic? It's not. It's criminal. But that's what happens. You see, this program, your program, Cynthia, is undemocratic because you're giving voice to people who have a different point of view. You're a threat to democracy. And we can joke about it. I mean, but the point is, you are a threat to democracy in the eyes of the powers that be.
Mm-hmm.
Joe is a threat. I am a threat. Right now, we can sort of laugh about it because we haven't gotten to the jackboot stage of oppression and suppression. But the fact that you have the FBI and the Department of Home Security working with social media platforms to deplatform people, the next step is to silence people, not just deplatform them, but silence them, to make dissent criminal. And that's the direction we're heading. That's why we don't live in a democracy anymore, because what makes a democracy function is the ability of its citizens to exercise free speech so that they can empower themselves with knowledge and information to make informed decisions about who we want to elect to office and why. Our elected representatives don't want us to make these decisions. They don't want us to be empowered with information. They want us to just be compliant to the system that will tell us who to vote for. As Joe said, we're not allowed. They take all options away. 150,000 votes. That's impossible to do. The Republican Party, if it was started from ground up, couldn't do that. It's an established party, but if we truly want to have democracy, we have to give dissenting voices on the left, the right, the middle, whatever, an opportunity to grow. We shouldn't be afraid of dissent. We should embrace dissent. Dissent makes us stronger by challenging, the strongly held positions. But it's not happening. We're being silenced. So it's not just about the vote. It's about speech. It's about thought. It's about living. It's about existing. It's about being an American citizen. Frankly speaking, I'll say this straight up. Being a good American citizen is a threat to democracy, at least the way democracy is defined by the powers that be. America has ceased to exist. We call ourselves the United States of America, but we don't stand for anything that we claim to stand for. Our founding fathers would be rolling in their graves if they could see the travesty that this promise, the vision, the potential that they set in motion. Imperfect, I know that. I know it was imperfect, but the whole idea was that we were going to form a more perfect union by working it through democratically to give the American people the opportunity to speak, to act, to empower. We're silencing the American people. We're the American sheep, and the political parties are the shepherds. And we keep looking at them going, oh, the shepherd's here to take care of us, not realizing that the shepherd's final job is to lead us to slaughter.
Mm. And on that note, we should close for the day. Do you have any final thoughts, Joe?
Well, I think we have to keep on doing what we're doing. We have to keep on speaking truth to power, even though it becomes more difficult. There are people like Julian Assange who they want to keep in prison for the rest of his life because he did expose things like that. Other political prisoners that are in our prisons for doing similar things. So we have to keep on doing it. And I really think in the long run, because what we are saying is in the interest of the people of the United States and the people of the world, that in the long run, we will succeed. That's our only hope to do. That's the best we can do right now. And I think that that's what we will see.
Uh, I think after the election, maybe we can recap exactly what went on. So, Joe, what's going on with your organization?
Well, as I said, we just held a series of demonstrations right before the elections because the war was not being spoken about the elections. So UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, unacpeace.org, um, called for actions, and we had actions across the United States and Canada in about 80 different places. Most of them were modest, some were very good, some were not so modest. It actually exceeded our expectations of what is possible because it's very difficult to organize street actions right before an election when a lot of people's energy is going into the election. But we thought it was important to do because the war, the most important thing in politics of our day, is not even being discussed, is not allowed to be discussed. So we did do that. We're now putting together out of that a rapid response team so we could respond to other activities, such as the U.S. has now put troops in Haiti, where it's clear they're going to do something down there, and in many other countries, the U.S. is becoming more active, especially towards China and Taiwan. And we need a strong anti-war movement and a strong voice. So we're organizing around these issues. People can find us at unacpeace.org and get onto our email list. That's very, very important so we can keep in touch with each other. That's the way we do it.
So, Scott, you have a new website. Tell everybody about your website.
Well, the website is scottritterextra.com. And it's the one shop stop, I guess, for anything I write and any videos such as this that I participate in. We post it on there. It's also the only platform in which people keep telling me to monetize things, monetize this, monetize that. I can't do it. I'm not a very good monetizer. I believe that information should be freely given and available to all. But having said that, it's very hard, as everybody here knows, to do things for free. So anybody who wants to donate or help can do so through that website. That's the only legitimate way to do it. There's a lot of fraudulent Scott Ritters out there, unfortunately, people who are using my name and they're out there. And unfortunate people have come to me and said, "Hey, I just donated $120 to this scottritter.com site." And I said, "Well, that ain't me. You just gave $120 away to somebody else."
Wow.
So there's a lot of that going on. So if you feel inclined, and again, I'm not pressuring anybody to do so, but if you ever feel inclined to support, it can only be done through scottritter.extra.com. I'm also working on, I had a very successful book event in Poughkeepsie last week. Not only for me in terms of moving product, but in terms of accessing, being able to talk to people. 65 people showed up. We had a very good give and take. I spoke, I took questions, and I'm getting ready to do the same thing in Massachusetts on November 18th and 19th. I'll be speaking in Northampton, Massachusetts on the 18th. Massachusetts Peace Action, I think, is running this. And then I'll be speaking in Boston on the 19th, again, an event run by Massachusetts Peace Action. So they're open to the public, and I would encourage everybody to come. You'll have a chance to hear me speak. You'll have a chance to ask me questions. And if you're so inclined, there will be books available if you'd like to buy them, and I will sign them for you.
And tell us a little bit about the book.
Look, this book is more and more relevant every day. First of all, it's a great piece of history, but today we just spent a lot of time talking about the history leading up to to the events of Maidan in 2014. You can't just view something in a vacuum. You want to talk about what's going on today, especially when we talk about nuclear weapons and disarmament. You have to go back to the history. And one of the most important moments in history when it comes to disarmament between the United States and Russia is the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. I wrote a book that describes the first 3 years of implementation of that treaty, how we got to where we are, what we did, what it meant. I tell it through my story, so it's not too boring for all those people out there going, "Whoa, disarmament." I might be rolling my eyes back in my head. It's told from the eyes of a Marine. So I liken it to Harry Potter. How what made the first Harry Potter novel so cool was not just the story, but it was living the experience through Harry Potter, who was discovering magic as he went on. You read this book, you're going to be through the eyes of a Marine who's discovering the world of disarmament and Soviets that I thought were the enemy, who I suddenly view as humans. It's a journey that you take with me, but it's also a template for hope. People keep asking, how do we get out of this nightmare that we're in today? What is the diplomatic off ramp? And I will tell you, the most dangerous threat facing the world today is nuclear weapons. Disarmament is our only salvation. And this book provides a template of disarmament that, is founded in the lessons of the past and can be applied to the future to save the world. So that's why I think this book is a very important book.
And they could get it through Amazon and what other platforms?
Well, you can actually get it through scottritterextra.com. We have a link there. And the only reason I bring that up is that we actually get a little bit from the publisher if you go through that route. But you can go directly to the publisher, claritypress.com. You can also get it through Amazon. You can get it through Barnes and Nobles. And if you go to your bookstores and you ask for it, they'll actually put it on the bookshelf.
Great. So we'll have another conversation after the election to sort everything all out. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. If you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube page. Joe, again, happy birthday, Scott. It's been a pleasure talking with the both of you. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you, Cynthia.